Hey everyone, it's Mazzy here, and thanks for coming back. I really appreciate you jumping in and watching some of these videos. This is Neo-Psychedelic, Neo-Psychedelic artist, 30 or so Neo-Psychedelic artists, about 2 albums each. Now, why am I doing this and what is Neo-Psychedelic? These are about 30 artists that I've fallen in love with over the last 40 years. Why 40 years? It just seems a nice little package, give or take from 1980 to 81. And I've done several psychedelic videos, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and the United Kingdom. And I think I wanted to show the new psychedelia, albums that were influenced by the 60s psychedelia thing, but records that really took that scene of psychedelic, that idea and concept of psychedelia, and went in different directions. Now, on those videos, I got a lot of responses with records I forgot, records I didn't include. A handful of people said, that's not psychedelic, that's something else. How can that be psychedelic? Well, I'm talking about the psychedelic scene. I grew up in San Francisco, and I have a feel, things that feel this way. And these are from my point of view. And again, these are records from my collection. So if they're not here, either I forgot them or I don't have them in my collection. So these are not definitive things. These are personal showcases of records that fit a mood and style. And these records and these artists veer in so many different directions. But I'm one that just never really liked all these genres and subgenres and subgenres. So these bands, came out of the alternative movement, the Britpop movement, the jingle jangle movement, the shoegaze movement, the math rock movement. There's so many subgenres that it's been kind of crazy that you have to goth movement, the post-punk, everything. A lot of these you're familiar with. There might be a handful that some of you have never heard of and you might want to dive in and check into. And by all means, comment and suggest others. But I hope you like my presentation. Again, these are Neo-Psychedelic albums from the last 40 years, about 30. Now, I'm not ranking them this time because you just can't compare these records. And I'm not one that can go back and do my entire 100 best of or 200 best of. And I admire the people. There's a handful going around now of these friends of mine who are showcasing their favorite artists of the last 20 years or forever. And I applaud them for doing that. I can do it in small chunks. But these are just 30 artists, maybe 60 albums that I love and I love to showcase in the neo-psychedelic arena. So sit back and enjoy, and subscribe and comment if you so desire. I'm going to start with these EP and LP of Dukes of the Stratosphere. This is true psychedelia. In a way, some might think it's parody psychedelia. It's the XTC trying to do a series of records that really emulate that great 1966, 67, 68 sound of psychedelia. Fantastic music if you like this type of sound, if you like that sound. And they did it well, and they recreated it really interesting. So Dukes of the Stratosphere is my first selection. And since I'm showing that, let's get right into XTC. And these to me are the two of their albums that are the most psychedelia. I think Oranges and Lemons definitely is one of them. I love this record. This is 1989. And of course, Todd Rundgren's production of Skylarking with Grass and Dear God. Promo copy I got, Dear God was added later, but has that great feel of psychedelia. Again, this is music that has the feel, at least from my point of view. Then there are the Flaming Lips. I mean, they're just so entrenched in the psychedelic electronic sound. And I could pick any record of theirs, after their first sort of interest or push into this type of music. I don't have Yoshima as an album. I have a CD of it, so I just pulled the greatest hits because that whole thing with Do You Realize and Yoshima Battles, it's a form of psychedelia. Now, as I said early on, I mean, you could divide this up into jangle pop and shoegaze and art rock and Britpop, and there's so many genres that I ain't gonna do. I'm just lumping it into this neo-psychedelic scene for the sake of this video, for my taste. One of my favorite artists, and to me who does psychedelic as well as anyone, and just adds another dimension to it, of course, that's Prince. And these two albums, Around the World in a Day, probably his most psychedelic album, but my favorite is Sign of the Times, and particularly the song The Cross. It's a very dirge-like psychedelic piece of music, and the expanded set on this is amazing. But these two albums, so let's go back to 1982. Dream Syndicate. I fell in love with this album, and I saw them at the Warfield Theater in San Francisco. What's great about the Dream Syndicate, they also had a very dirgy, psychedelic, post-punk sound. Amazing band live, and goes on to long, extended jams. So they're just right in that pocket of good psychedelia. And they had a rebirth in the last 6-7 years. They came back and made already 3 great albums. And this one that came out in the last year and a half, The Universe Inside, wonderful long psychedelic jams, just a beautiful record. An extension 40 years later of this, almost 40 years later. But Dream Syndicate, Steve Wynn led band with Carl Pagoda. Kendra Smith was in the original band, not anymore, and Dennis Duck. But love these. Saw them again in right in '82. Saw them again in Seattle about 4 years ago. Remember being in England in the 1980, and there's several records I picked up around this time, and one I picked up and I didn't know anything about. And you could say this is not psychedelic, but to me this is totally in a psychedelic experience, and that is Echo and the Bunnymen Crocodiles. I picked this album. I hadn't heard of the band, but that name just sold it for me. I think this is a fabulous record, which has Crocodiles, Rescue, Pictures on My Wall, an amazing record. But my favorite record by them is Ocean Rain. Fantastic record. I think it's a more mature record, but and more poppy in a way. But The Killing Moon, Seven Seas, Ocean Rain, My Kingdom, fantastic record, band from Liverpool, and I think they do this kind of psychedelic Britpop really wonderfully. Favorite band of mine. And around that same time, another band that I got into from my trips in England, and then of course, both these bands I saw here when they toured America, Psychedelic Furs. This record in particular, obviously they got more pop in a psychedelic way with President Gas, Love My Way, Forever Now, of course, Pretty in Pink later on and that whole story. But this record opening up with India, and it starts with a slow build up. It's a really dramatic piece of music, and it's really psychedelic. Sister Europe, We Love You, soap commercial, Imitation of Christ, great song. Psychedelic Furs, Richard Butler's intense, gravelly vocal, and the push of this band. And, they got hooked into this whole 80s thing because of the John Hughes movies and connection there, but they were a great band live. I actually saw them again about 5 years ago here in Seattle. And they still do great stuff. So Psychedelic Furs, it's right in their name, right? One of the best albums in the late 80s psychedelic revival period, I think, is Stone Roses. Fantastic band from Manchester. I think they made only 2 albums, but this is the one. This is a perfect record. Psychedelic English, late 90s, that whole Britpop thing. Now, I want to let you know up front, I did not include Oasis in this thing. I don't think they're psychedelic enough for my taste. And I like Oasis, and I know they went into that whole thing, but I'm not including Oasis. So those of you who want me to include Oasis, ain't gonna happen this time. Unfortunately, there was a whole contractual thing with their label when they signed to Geffen Records, and their second sophomore album wasn't met very positively. So, but Stone Roses, another great band. I only have one of their records, and they're a Scottish band, Primal Scream. This album, Sonic Flower Groove, is more in the jangle pop thing, but again, as you know, I don't like to do these sub genres, so it's all neo-psychedelic to me in this case, but Primal Scream. This guy is incredible, and I probably should have included a Teardrop Explodes album, but I didn't. No Teardrop Explodes. But to me, Julian Cope, who was the lead singer of that band, got more psychedelic. Obviously, there's a pop psychedelia, Britpop thing to this album with World Shut Your Mouth and Trampoline. Really wonderful sort of psychedelic pop record. But this one, Peggy's Suicide, this is an incredible record that I always try to turn my friends onto, especially the song Safe Surfer. It just has this great like psychedelic guitar, and it goes on for a long meandering experience. But this is a wonderful double record, and I think he is one of these lost soul musical geniuses that in a way lost himself, but he put out some very amazing records, including this one. I think this is his best solo record, Peggy's Suicide. But again, I highly recommend the more pop sound of Teardrop Explodes as well. Going to Wales now, and I have several of their albums on vinyl, but to me, they're two most interesting albums. They're most psychedelic. They have a mix of electro psychedelic, where they're mixing a lot of electronic. When I saw them, I saw them on this one tour, or legs of the tour, 3 times. And 2 of the 3 times they brought in a whole surround sound system, and it was unbelievable. And it was based on this album. There's a DVD surround 5.1 of this, and this is Rings Around the World, Super Furry Animals, the band from Wales, incredible pop, psychedelic, experimental, electronic, but very accessible. They have 2 albums, I believe, sung in Welsh, and the other one I'm going to include is Phantom Power, opening up with this great song called Hello Sunshine, which has sort of a sampling of a 70s sort of sunshine pop singing opener. But both these records are incredible. This is my favorite of the 2. They're teasing this coming out on vinyl again, and I hope these both do, because this is an album that everyone who likes British music, psychedelic music, Britpop, but something really more elaborate and on a scale of a dare I say, a Sgt. Pepper, where there's a lot of creative juices and intensity in this. I recommend, out of all these records, I think Ring Around the World is something that is very interesting, and I'm a huge fan of this band, but especially Super Furry Animals, Ring Around the World. If you get a chance, if you do have a surround system, get the DVD surround and really just blast this, and with the visuals, and it's an awesome experience. Getting a little new now, 2 in a row here. And there's this trend, there's a trend of these sort of, it's been around for a while, not anything new really, but of artists, DJs, producers putting things out under their name, and it becomes a project. I mean, you can go back to the 70s with Alan Parsons, who was an engineer at Abbey Road, a producer at Abbey Road, and then of course, you all know probably the Alan Parsons Project, where different parts and pieces and musicians and vocalists were brought in. But on a little different level is this, and this is Caribou, and Caribou is Dan Snaith, who's a Canadian DJ producer, and he does these projects that's more electro, dancey, psychedelic. And this album, I believe, was Our Love. I think this was the first one he did, which is very psychedelic. After this, it became more electronic with this album and beyond. And as much as I like this, there is this trend with these artists who are doing kind of psychedelic stuff to all of a sudden now these new artists drop the psychedelia and go with what I consider the Coachella electronic thing. And maybe that's me, my ageism showing a little bit. And as interesting as it is, to me, it gets a little boring and monotonous. And I like electronic music, electronica. It depends when it's mixed and done really in an interesting and original way, and not only a repetitive dance beat. And I'm not against repetitive dance beats, but I think this is definitely the more interesting of the two, the more clever and creative, and has those psychedelic musical values and styles that I personally like. The other one, in a similar way, is an Australian, and those of you who follow this kind of music know who I'm going to say, and that's Tame Impala. And this is Kevin Parker, producer out of Australia. Same situation, very psychedelic. I love this record. This is Lonerism. I think, again, this is the first album he put out under the name Tame Impala, and his subsequent records to this have become more electronic, dance-based, the Coachella sound. You know, that's just, again, my naivete probably, and those of you younger fans of this type of stuff can expand and comment what your take on that is. And I have several of those other albums, but to me, I like that little psychedelic soul thing that was happening in, again, probably around 2013, 2014, that started as sort of a psychedelic revival and has changed somewhat since then. Okay, now there's a little excursion into the Bay Area, the San Francisco scene that came out obviously into the 90s, 2000s, and present time. And some of these I missed the first time around, but I'm fully entrenched now. And one is the Brian Jonestown Massacre. This is their best album, hands down, what I've heard, their Satanic Majesty's Second Request, obviously a play on the Rolling Stones album. Very psychedelic, very interesting record, and very accessible. Jam style a little bit, but the songs are really well produced, and it's almost got a very improvisational feel with this. Obviously the songs were worked out, and it goes from there. So I would say this is their best album. And this one is also really good. Take It From the Man, the Brian Jonestown Massacre. A very interesting project-based ensemble from San Francisco. Highly recommended as well. Also a band that I got into, and the irony of this is I didn't get into this band until I moved to Seattle. And one of my first trips to a record store, I remember Sonic Boom Records in Seattle was playing something that had a repetitive drone-like feel, but not electric-based. It was guitar-based and rhythmic and psychedelic at the same time, and that's Wooden Ships. This just blew me away, and I bought this album as a result, like on the spot. I think they had 2 copies left. Open it up. I mean, how psychedelic is that, right? It's really wonderful, wonderful record. This is on Jackpot Recording Studios, I think, issued this record. And this record, the main protagonist is Ripley Johnson, who now is in Portland, Oregon. But I just fell in love with Wooden Ships. And by the way, Ships is spelled S-H-J-I-P-S. Pronounced Sade, maybe. And this record is also a great record. This is a live record recorded in San Francisco. So I wish I had seen them. He has the Rose City Project, Rose City Band now, based out of Portland. I'm not sure if Wooden Ships has ceased to exist, but really interesting, psychedelic, rhythmic records. And he's kind of getting into this whole, with Rose City, a Grateful Dead feel of around 1970s, Working Man's Dead period, American Beauty of the Grateful Dead. But with a little, folky country tinge added on here, but highly recommended. Again, originally from San Francisco, and now Ripley Johnson is based in Portland. Another San Francisco recent band over the last 5 years, 4 years even, is Heron Oblivion. Heron Oblivion, in a way, they were sort of a semi-super group, if you know. They're guys from and women from the Elpers and Comets on Fire. I saw them in San Francisco when this album came out, and it was just fabulous. It's got a little psychedelic folk rock, a little Fairport Convention type influence with a female singer, but great guitar work. This is a live EP, I guess, or album from the show that I saw at the Chapel in San Francisco on Valencia Street. So I recommend Heron Oblivion, especially this record. I mean, this is a great live version, but this is a wonderful record. If you like psychedelic and folk rock psychedelic a little bit, I highly recommend this, Heron Oblivion on Sub Pop Records. Sub Pop out of Seattle. Now, another band that I really liked, now those of you out there are going to probably say they're not psychedelic, but they're a dirge-like, jammy, the slowest band I know. Well, actually, there's a couple here, but this is one of the two. And this is the project Red House Painters. This is a box set that came out several years ago. And of course, Mark Koselleck, that morphed into Sun Kill Moon. But I love these records. And no matter what, I'm going to love these records. And these are on 4AD with fantastic cover art. Again, based in San Francisco. I saw them play around quite a bit in the Bay Area in the 90s. And of course, this is great. All these records are great. There's also a record, what's it called? Guitar, I'm blanking out. It's a double record. I didn't bring it out here. And it has a really kind of cool meandering version, like a 10-minute version of Silly Love Songs that you won't even recognize, the McCartney Wings songs, Silly Love Songs. But Red House Painter, to me, fits in the mood of the psychedelic experience, how I see the psychedelic experience, okay? Not just wah-wah guitars and LSD trips. Of course, that might be good with an LSD trip, or mushroom trip, maybe better. All right, moving right along. Okay, this is, you're gonna say, oh, it's electronic, that's lounge music, but Stereolab to me fits right into this definition of how I personally see psychedelia. Mood, a tone, experimentation, whether it's electronic, whether it's lounge, whether it's guitar based, whether it's keyboard and synthesizer based, but obviously dots and loops. And Stereolab, Cobra, and Phases group play Voltage in the Milky Night. I could have picked really any other one. To me, I only got into them recently. I missed the boat the first time around. So I love putting any of these records on. They have different feels. It could be everything from French pop to psychedelic to lounge music, but it fits in this feeling of this music, this type of music from the last 40 years that I just think it's wonderful. And what I love about this whole set of albums here, these are very experimental. Some are very catchy, very pop-based, but they came about it from a very kind of wonderful exploration in the recording studio. And that's what I love about these records. Another one, which is a favorite of mine, and this might be my favorite of theirs, is Love and Rockets. And this is Love and Rockets, Love and Rockets, Love and Rockets. It's amongst my favorite. They came out of two members of Bauhaus, so they got a real Gothic rock sense. Post-punk, Gothic, moody, dirgy. But again, it's got that feel of psychedelia, pop, but in a really beautiful way. The other record, which I do not have on vinyl anymore, and I have this kind of nice little CD box collection, I'd say the other one I would have picked that I'd like to get is this album. It's very accessible, and this is Earth, Sun, Moon by Love and Rockets. Again, two members of Bauhaus. I could have probably pulled a Peter Murphy record, or a Bauhaus record for that matter, because it has that feel. But to me, this gets into the more psychedelic feel that I'm trying to convey here with this video. Now, one of my favorite artists the last 25 years, I think he's a musical genius. I know some friends that lately, they're not enamored with his more electronic dance pop sound, but that is Beck. Beck from LA, Beck the producer, Beck the recording artist. He's into country music, he's into psychedelic, he's into pop, he's into electronic, he's into hip hop. He's into everything. Obviously, probably his most successful album, in a way, one of his most successful is Beck Odelay. And it mixes hip hop and samples, and really beautiful. There's a famous sample from Van Morrison's version of a Bob Dylan song. And it's just really, really great on this record. But I think this is his most psychedelic. This record sounds like a folk psychedelic album along the lines of early or Ziggy Stardust Bowie, Hunky Dory Bowie, Kinks from the late 60s, has that great sound, and it's somewhat psychedelic, not in terms of the screaming psychedelic wah-wah guitars, but it's great folk psychedelic in a way. And I think this is one of my all-time favorite Beck albums, Mutations. Highly recommended album. So I think Beck is a great place to go. The one album I have by The Verve is Urban Hymns. I think it's the one album that I recommend to everybody. What a great, Britpop, alternative, neo-psychedelic record from 1997. A fantastic record. Of course, it has the hit Bittersweet Symphony, which resulted in a lawsuit because they're sampling, the orchestration sampling this was some work done by Andrew Loog Oldham, of course, the producer of the Rolling Stones, who put out a really interesting instrumental orchestral cover album of Rolling Stone songs, and that was plagiarized or sampled by The Verve without permission. But they kind of settled the lawsuit. I think a co-production, co-creative authorship was settled on because it's a great record. I mean, look, you're going to sample, ask. That's all I say. Some people say all these artists are suing. Just ask. Sample. You're taking some other artist's creation and using it in your work. Get the licensing rights. Suzanne Vega had a similar situation where Tom's Diner was sampled by a rapper and an artist, and they had to settle it, and she got co-credit and helped her career, also revitalize her thing. But fantastic record, Britpop psychedelia at its best, at its finest, from 1997, The Verve. I couldn't talk about neo-psychedelic, and especially the rebirth and the reinvention and influence of 60s music, without talking about World Party. Carl Wallinger. Carl Wallinger was an original member of the Waterboys and did something completely, I want to say original, but it almost is not original, but he did it really well. He had a series of albums. This is Private Revolution. And this is Bang. These were just reissued here, and the whole reissue program is coming out, rolling out now. The one I don't have here, I have on CD, is Goodbye Jumbo. That will be out this fall on vinyl. World Party did Dylan, the Beatles, and the Rolling Stones almost as good as the Beatles, Dylan, and the Rolling Stones, but made it modern, made it fit into the late 80s, early 90s with a little bit of the electronic, modern, soulful movement. He emulated, soul artists of the 70s and just did these brilliant, catchy songs. Ship of Fools, Private Revolution. It's danceable at times. It's psychedelic a lot. It's folk rock, and it's just a really, really great, wonderful collection of catchy records. But they're really up there in terms of recreation of psychedelia and taking psychedelic music and making it theirs. Very much like Andy Partridge does with XTC and Dukes of the Stratosphere. But World Party, recommend these now. Jump on these reissues because and just listen to them. I think you'll enjoy them. Very catchy music, very catchy albums. You know how surf guitar can morph beautifully into psychedelia? I think some of you may know what I'm talking about, but Green on Red was a band in the late 80s also from Tucson, Arizona, that started out as sort of a surf country band and morphed into this band, Green on Red. And this album is Gas, Food, Lodging. Fantastic, alternative, garage, psychedelia in a way. Love this record. Great band. I got to see them when they came around this period of time. And this is another one I have, No Free Lunch. This is an EP by Green on Red. Beautiful thing. Anytime you see their records, if you like that whole Southwest sound that converges in psychedelia, of course, you know, you can go back to the 13th Floor Elevator that did it, you know, beautifully out of Texas in the 60s. But I think there was a period in the 80s. The stuff had cult followings. It didn't catch on big time. It kind of was early in the, you know, the Paisley Underground movement, another fucking subgenre. I don't want to stick on anyone here, but let's just call it all neo-psychedelic again. I'm calling that for the sake of this video, but you can place these bands in any subgenre, sub-subgenre, sub-sub-sub-genre. Green on Red. Continuing with that whole like surf guitar psychedelic thing, I gotta showcase the Sadies. The Sadies are a Canadian band. They've been around 25, 30 years. Two brothers that have this amazing dueling guitar sound. Now, out of all these bands here, I highly suggest if you ever get a chance, if these guys come to your town, you need to see them live. They're amazing live. They have a rockabilly dueling guitar sound that is amazing. They have a little bit of the jingle jangle, birds-like sound on this. There's a wonderful song on here called, let's see, The Quiet One. This is beautiful, haunting, melodic song. Almost reminds me of a song written about George Harrison, like The Quiet Beetle. And it's just amazing. This is called Darker Circles. This is probably my favorite record all around, but all the records have great bits, parts, and pieces to it. This is when New Seasons, obviously, this whole infrared type style cover treatment on this is right in the whole pocket of psychedelia. Their records you can get through Bandcamp and their own label. Some of these are on Yep Rock Records, but a very, very favorite band of mine. I probably have 6 of their records. The Sadies. Very influential band, one of the tightest bands I've seen. And when they rip live, the guitar playing is kind of amazing. It's pretty special, the Sadies. All right, we're winding down here, and I'm gonna show, now, I think most of you are gonna say, Mazzy, have you lost your hat? No, there's 2 up behind me and one's on. Have you lost your noggin? Have you gone out there? Psychedelic, this band is not psychedelic. Again, it's got this feeling of experimentation, haunting. It's got the goth post-punk thing going on. And Susie Sue and the Banshees. This is a fantastic covers record. I don't usually like to show covers records in these kind of videos unless it's specific, but she sang and interpreted these songs. You Lost Little Girl by The Doors, The Passenger by Iggy Pop, Sea Breezes, a Roxy Music song. Of course, This Wheel's on Fire, which has been used on various soundtracks, and Strange Fruit, the amazing song that made famous early on by Billie Holiday. Incredible record. Electronic, psychedelic, goth rock, and of course, this one with the great song Christine. fantastic record. She does an amazing version. I have a 12-inch EP of her doing a cover version of Dear Prudence, and she really makes that song by the Beatles hers. So in my psychedelic feel, in the moment of these 30-odd records, psychedelic records, Susan the Banshees. And lastly, the artist that ripped me off, the artist that took my name, she stole my name, they stole my name. Hope Sandoval, Daniel Roebuck, is it Brian Roebuck? Daniel Roebuck from Opal. They merged from Opal, and of course they became Mazzy Star. I was Mazzy before Mazzy Star existed. But this record, I always hear this record to this day in cafes, in restaurants. It's the haunting song sung by Hope Sandoval, David Roebuck. That's who I'm thinking of. I'm sorry, David Roebuck, who we just lost last year, unfortunately. What a great, beautiful, ethereal, moody album. Fade Into You. If you don't know Mazzy Star, I'm almost 100% sure, or 99% sure you've heard Fade Into You. This music is haunting, it's beautiful. Everybody I know, when I play this record or hear this record, they just want to get this record. And it's hard to describe or stick in a certain genre of music. For this, obviously, it's psychedelic because it's experimental, it's haunting, it's moody, it's trippy. It's heroin-like psychedelia. Not that I know what that's like specifically, but it's got that like mood-based psychedelic feel. And I want to add this one. This is not a Mazzy Star album. This is pretty much a solo Hope Sandoval. Hope Sandoval and the Warm Invention Until the Hunter. Another gorgeous record with her soothing, personal, emotional vocals. Just really a lovely album. I mean, that's what the album sounds like. It sounds like you're at the beach alone. It sounds like you're in a beach house alone at 2 a.m. and you put this music on, or in your urban abode and wherever you are. Just really beautiful, beautiful music. So Mazzy Star ends this tour of about 30 or so psychedelic, neo-psychedelic artists from the last 40 years. So chime in, I know I missed some, probably because I don't have them, and maybe some I just didn't think of in the moment, but these are amongst my favorite, not ranked, but hopefully you've learned of one or two that you may kind of check out and enjoy. So Mazzy loves you. Enjoy the psychedelic experience. I'll link below the other psychedelic videos I've done because I think they're really interesting and they've been pretty popular. So again, thanks for watching. Greatly appreciate it.